seen God, but I know how I feel. It's people like you who make him so real. And that is what's been going on in this sobriety countdown tonight. And if you don't think this program works, you saw it tonight. What an incredible display of God's grace working through people. Unbelievable. My prayer always is, dear Lord, please help me to say whatever I'm going to say from my heart. And please help me make some contribution to this day. I would be remiss if I didn't thank just all of you. Absolutely
all of you.
You know, in the AA Comes of Age, there's a story in the back of it written by Dr. Bauer, who was a long time ago a non-alcoholic trustee of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he spoke at the St. Louis Convention, and it was one of his first experiences with AA. He had never seen the love that went on in this room, or these rooms. And he told about the story of an intoxicated gentleman who was way up on a bridge overlooking a river way down below on a moonlit night. And the intoxicated alcoholic saw his image way down there in the mirror in the river, and he said, how in the world did I get from there up here? And if any of you think, boy, you'll never get me up there, don't count on it. To thank the committee, to have Nancy as my host. The circuitous route that got me here is absolutely unbelievable. You know what your unbelievable story is. We all have one. And I am just so awed, so deeply grateful having the privilege of being here. I never counted on this when I got sober. In fact, I thought, I was 85 in January. I never thought I'd live this long, let alone be sober this long. Unbelievable. Somebody asked me this weekend if I were nervous, I think was the word. It's not nervous, it's awesome. I cannot believe this. Because the night before I came to you, I committed suicide. It was not my intent to be here. So I always say that I am sober and here today through God's grace and cookie sheets. And if I remember later why the cookie, well, I'll tell you, because it was the day of my last drink. My husband didn't give me, it was on Valentine's Day in 1961. And Charlie didn't give me Valentine. Well, it was 5 days off my last drink, and you would have thought the red carpet should be out by then. And it wasn't. And besides, he gave me cookie sheets, and I didn't think that was very romantic, so I drank it. So I'm here through God's grace and cookie sheets. I have a friend who says, thank God for the cookie sheets. Also God's grace. And why? Because I'm an alcoholic. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My home group is the Mount Group down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Though I need to give Cheshire, Connecticut credit for my first 13 years in this fellowship. And my name is Tommie D. I always use my last name because Bill W. asked us to please use our last names within the fellowship. I hate to say who said what this weekend because you've all said it so beautifully, but I think it was this afternoon that we talked about, Jack talked about our anonymity tradition, which is on the level of press, radio, TV, and film. And yes, within the fellowship, Bill asked us to please use our last names so that we don't violate that tradition of anonymity within the fellowship, but certainly on the public level, we do respect it. In fact, anytime I've done any radio work, or even 12-step work, I use the name Jane. So if I say my name's Jane tonight, why, that's why. This convention has been an awesome weekend, has it not? Every single person has contributed something here. And I wonder why it's you and I here tonight. How come I have not heard a count, but I wonder if you will remember when you had your first drink of your last drum. I know where I was. Did you take that drink with the idea of being here tonight? I sure didn't. So there's some power going on that is beyond me. Why it is us here tonight, like Jack said this afternoon, this group will never be together again, nor have we ever been together before. Why is it that it's you and I here tonight and not 400 or 500 other people? So I have no answer for why I'm here when it was not my intent. I came from a family of 3 daughters. I like to say I came from a dysfunctional family. We've heard that word, but I'm it, and everybody else was just fine in my family. My father had the same job for 45, 46 years. My mother was a homebody, church organist for 35 years or so. My family didn't drink or smoke. I don't know if they ever did anything that felt good. I don't know how I got here. I don't know about you, but we came from a very private family. It was a very loving family, but it was an assumed kind of thing. Anything I was ever involved with, my parents were always there. But nobody ever talked about what was going on inside of them. So we knew we were loved. But in our family, they didn't talk about their insides. We talked about time and weather and other people, especially if they weren't there, but nobody talked about themselves. So I grew up thinking that all this stuff that was inside of me was either for bad girls or wrong girls. I had my first drink when I was a senior in high school. And I had that drink for approval, strictly for approval. I never asked the young man with whom I was, but I assumed that's what he wanted me to do. And for that point on, until probably even after I came to you, I did whatever somebody else wanted me to do, whether or not I wanted to do it, for the sake of approval. I can't believe it. And I've come to believe since that that's all part of my emotional immaturity. I was involved, my first profession, I played in an all-girls band. I was very interested in music and sports, and played in this all-girls band and saw what alcohol was doing to people, and I wasn't going to let that happen to me. So I went into the medical profession, and here I am. Shows me I'm not running the show, that's for sure. I've had 2 deliberate drunks in my life. There were hundreds of other ones, but only 2 deliberate ones. The first one was when I was a senior in college, and we went to New York from Connecticut for a tour of hospitals. And 5 of us bought a pint to see what it was like to get drunk. 3 of them backed out. There are a bunch of alcoholics in this room, because you know the next line, you know I was one who did not, and I never backed out of anything I ever said I would do. And I vowed I would never drink again. Famous last words for the alcoholic. The second one, my husband bought a hearse. Now, it was in my paranoia-like stage of drinking. You know what I thought he was going to do with it. It was awful. Well, we had 5 children at the time. I'm jumping ahead so I don't forget this story because somebody asked me to please tell it. And it's true. I don't know if all my story's true, but this one is true. We had a station wagon at the time. We had 5 children, and Charlie said, well, they were young. When I got sober, they were 6, 8, 10, 12, and 14. And I was 39. They are 53, 55, 57, no, Barb died, 59 and 61 now. But Charlie said, these little kids, we have a 2 foot longer station wagon, the children are going to have room to grow. It was logical. And he said, besides, if we are out on a camping trip sometime and we can't find a place to park, he said, we could just stop along the side of the road. He said, in a hearse, nobody's going to bother us. I was talking one night a couple of months ago, and I thought, what if we did that? And as somebody walked in the window, we all looked in the window, we all started moving. That would have been awful. Well, the next morning he decided to drive it to work. And I want you to know this was going to be the family car, the only car. So he drove it to work. And his uncle, with whom he was in business, thought it was a little inappropriate for a doctor to be making house calls. Wonder why I'm an alcoholic. That, my friends, is untreated alcoholism. Unbelievable. The hearse went the next day. Anyhow, let me get back to me. What did I used to be like? I was very shy. Still am. You wouldn't know it. Always felt different, and I don't know how you can figure that one out because I don't think I've ever been anybody different, but we all say we're different. We felt different. I wanted the attention, but when I got it, I didn't know what to do with it. I can call them by names today, but I couldn't then. Insecure. Full of self-pity, I don't know why. Did not like schoolwork, but I loved the sports and the music. Anything for attention. Didn't drink through high school, except that one drink. When I was in college, we started to have a drink a day. And you know, that first drink in high school was really a glass of guilt, because I knew my parents were opposed to it. At least I think that's why I felt guilt. When I got here, you told me, gee, I didn't even jump. That's pretty good. I must be getting better. When I got here, you told me that I had a physical allergy to alcohol, coupled with emotional immaturity and spiritual bankruptcy. And my story, I can tell it very briefly. You know, we hear everybody's stories and the circumstances of them are different, but the inside story is all the same. I don't know as my behavior matched. Well, I certainly didn't get bombed, and I wasn't out on the streets in my hometown soliciting myself. All these things could have happened. But every person, every speaker this weekend has talked about fears and the unknown fears, the loneliness, the aloneness, the resentment, what I call it Siamese twin self-pity, because I can't have one without the other. the guilt, the remorse, the fears. Oh my God, what fears. And that's where I believe my alcoholism is, inside of me. So I could tell you lots of stories about the outside, and I will try to tell you a couple for identification purposes for my sake. But I think we can all identify on the inside. There aren't any non-alcoholic feelings. There are not any that are just non-alcoholic or alcoholic or male or female. They're all human. We all have them. And I think that's where each of us can identify with each other. And I think that's one of the reasons AA is so successful, because we do share our insides. I didn't know that there was the rest of me when I got here. I thought it was all up in my head. Well, I graduated from college, didn't get into any trouble with alcohol, was married soon after, and we started to have our family. We lived in a small town in Cheshire. And I don't really know where my alcoholism started, and it doesn't make any difference. Except we lived in a neighborhood where the mothers didn't work. And this gal, the five of us gals would get together for coffee clatch in the morning, and 11 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then the guys would come home, we'd all get together for cocktails. In 1950, we had a tragedy in our neighborhood, and one of our daughters, not my daughter at the time, another daughter, baby, was drowned in a tragic accident. And we increased our drinking. We would have double Manhattans or double Old Fashions. And 4 months later, her parents said, "We are drinking too much, and we're going back to our usual 2 Old Fashions." They all did, and I couldn't. And I believe that's where my real alcoholism started, as far as the amount that I was drinking. That first drink in high school ended up 21 years and 9 months later drinking out of a half-gallon bottle of gin. I had a pill ordered by a doctor in 1942, and in 1953-54, I was withdrawing myself from morphine. And what went on in between are the exact same things that happened to you as far as behavior is concerned. There was the progression. I did what mothers in small towns do. I was a Girl Scout leader. I was a choir mother. I was a hot lunch worker, motor corps driver for the Red Cross, women's club, garden club, all the things that mothers in small towns do. And in the progression of my illness, I became the drinking Girl Scout leader, the drinking motor corps driver, the drinking hot lunch. Try to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches when you're shaking. It's terrible. The jelly shakes all over. I used to drive a lady, and then the drunken Girl Scout leader in the progression of my illness, the drunken motor corps driver, the drunken hot lunch worker. I remember once driving a lady who really was blind. Well, I was blind too, but a different way, to the store, and I was supposed to help her pick out the groceries, like canned beans. Well, she always found the beans before I even knew where the cans were, let alone where the beans were. I don't know how she did it, but she always got there first. And that was the story of my life. I would go around town at the end of my drinking, singing or whistling at the top of my lungs so people would think I was happy, happy, happy. Well, you should have seen me. I had the same filthy, dirty dungarees on, the same flannel shirt. My hair was up in pin curls for days because I had to be ready. Something very important was going to happen. I had to be ready. I had long since walked away from the God of my understanding, and I think Bobby spoke about that this morning. Back in the 40s, my sister was dying of cancer, and I told God it was okay for her to die. And I know today that's part of my emotional immaturity. But I had always believed in God. I went to Sunday school and church for about 15 years to get the strip, you know, that recognition that we need. And I told God it was okay for her to die, and she didn't. And I didn't know until 15 years later when I came to you that the only reason I wanted her to die was so I would stop hurting. I cannot believe my self-centeredness. I always wanted life to be just right so Tommie wouldn't hurt. So I walked away from that God. And I remember one night talking to my husband about how lonely I was. And he said, I don't know why you're lonely, and this was so logical. He said, you have 5 children, you have a lovely home, you can have just about everything you want. I don't know why you're lonely. And from the outside, that was so true. And you better believe I didn't talk to him about my feelings anymore. I never talked to anybody about my feelings. In fact, when I was 10 years old, my favorite grandmother died. My favoriteest person in the whole world, still is, died. Somebody else just did, too. And I cried. And I was taken, it was in the days when we had funerals in homes, you know. And I was taken out of my home to a neighbor's home. And for years, I thought it was because I cried. After I came to you, I thought, I wonder if my parents had me taken over to their friend's home because I hurt so bad. But I always took everything so negative growing up. Always had, they must think I'm da-da-da-da-da. So, I would tell alcohol that I was lonely. And it made me feel better. It said, have another one, you won't be so lonely. And I did, and I wasn't. And so in retrospect, and what I know of me today is in total retrospect, I understood none of this or recognized none of this as it was happening. Every time I had a feeling I didn't know what to do with, I drank. And I've heard it said that we have to learn how to do sober what we got drunk to do, or change our value system. And I got drunk to act out sexually, I got drunk to cry, I got drunk to be angry, because nice girls, big girls didn't do any of that. So I've had to learn how to do sober what I got drunk to do in an appropriate way for me, because it was very inappropriate in my drinking days. I didn't want to be an alcoholic mother, I didn't want to be an alcoholic wife, I didn't want to be an alcoholic anything. I don't think any of us, when we were little kids, say, boy, I can't wait to grow up and be an alcoholic. I remember so distinctly wanting, as my children were growing up, to have that beautiful smell of cookies baking when they came home from school. And my disease progressed so that I'd have to drink in the morning to get me going, to be able to motivate me to make the cookies. And one drink led to another one, and you know what happened, and I never got the cookies made. And I'd come to, and I'd have to drink over the guilt. I didn't know what else to do with guilt. I didn't know what else to do with any of my feelings, except to drink. Because drinking never judged me. It never told me, shame, shame. I told me that. I told me that. And the only thing I could do with those kinds of feelings was to drink. Probably 2 years before I came to you, somewhere around there, time really doesn't make a bit of difference, I decided to go to the psychiatrist to see what was the matter with Charlie that made me drink. This was the first of 7, by the way. And I defied him to tell me that I was an alcoholic. And he said, well, let's take a look at your drinking. How much you're drinking? I said, oh, 3 or 4 a day. Well, he thought I was talking about highballs. I was talking about pints. I just didn't know. He said, of course you're not an alcoholic. And I loved him for that. I went to the clergyman find out what was the matter with God, who wouldn't let me drink but keep me sober. I could not understand why I couldn't drink and not get drunk. And I tried, and I tried, and I tried. And I know you did too. My story is no different than anybody else. I just share what you told me, interpreted through my own thinking. Just couldn't understand it. Well, I got to AA. I thought it was a matter of willpower. What I should have had was won't power. I won't drink today. But I just couldn't do that. Just couldn't do it. And I went to the medical profession other than Charlie because this was all his fault anyhow. I was hoping for some horrible disease. I had it, but I didn't know I had it.
Yeah.
And I really believe that I couldn't believe that I was an alcoholic until alcohol forsook me. I truly believe we cannot believe in the spirit of alcohol, the spirit of God, and the spirit of AA, the spirit of alcohol, at the same time. Two powers do not work. And I believe AA is all about the power of God. And I came to you very angry. In July of 1960, before I came to you, I was in the Waterbury Hospital for malnutrition and dehydration. I had stopped eating for five or 6 months because it was the food that made me sick. It wasn't the alcohol. It's nice to drink in front of you. Isn't that awful to hide all that stuff? We don't have to hide anything anymore, and isn't that a gift? And I was in the room with a lady who, the diagnosis had everything to do with my alcoholism, but I didn't know it at the time. And I was in the hospital room with a lady who'd been injured in a horseback riding accident. Now believe me, I was no longer having anything to do with God, what I grew up with. And she had been injured in a horseback riding accident. A car hit the horse she was on, and the horse landed on her. And she had abrasions and fractured ribs, but was really doing quite well. And I was discharged from the hospital on a Saturday morning, and she was to go home that Monday. I had such a need to get back to that hospital that afternoon. Charlie was on staff there, and I said, "You got to take me back." I think he would have taken me over to the mental institution in Connecticut, but he said, "Why do you have to go back?" I said, "I don't know." In retrospect, it's the first acknowledgement that I'm aware of God's grace. But I said, "You have to take me back. It has to be the same bed. Please call the hospital, make sure that bed's available." And we did go back, and I got into bed. That night, the lady and I had a very wonderful conversation. And somehow I knew there was something terribly the matter with her. And I told the nurses, and they said, pooh-poohed it. They said, "Mrs. Dayton, go back to bed. She's fine." I couldn't do that. I've since been told I called her doctor and I called her husband, and they believed me, and her doctor came in, and 5 or 6 hours later he came to me and he said, "Mrs. Dayton, you saved this woman's life. She had a ruptured spleen and was bleeding internally." Well, I believe today it was God's grace that got me back to that hospital. It certainly was nothing in my head. And it came from somewhere inside of me that you're letting me get to through this fellowship. I came home from the hospital the next day. It's okay for me to go home. That lady just died a couple years ago at age 91, by the way. And she always gave me credit for saving her life, and I've always given her, through God's grace, the credit for saving my life, because it got me to believe there's something to this God business. I used to call then the man upstairs. So I went home and I didn't drink for I don't know, 2 or 3 months, something like that. We were giving a dinner party one night. I purposely did not drink during the cocktail hour. But I thought, Tom, you've been a good kid. You deserve to have a drink. You know that reward. So as my dinner was served, I ordered 1 Manhattan. That's all I was going to have. I thought it was the 3rd or 4th drink that got me drunk. Or that set up that, whatever it was. I couldn't call it compulsion then. And it did last. It was just 1 drink, but it lasted for 3 months because I absolutely could not stop. Could not stop. I was taken up to St. Francis Psychiatric Ward in Hartford, where I had, they call it sleep therapy, for 2 weeks. I came home with such a resentment, I didn't know what to do with it, because Charlie should have been up there. It was his fault. I did the only thing I knew what to do. I drank. And that afternoon, in a blackout, I drove with 2 of our children 35 miles away from our home, had a flat tire, I guess. I stopped, bought a new tire. I know nothing about this. I just know it was I who did it because it's my handwriting in the car expense book. Begged Charlie to come get me. I don't know how he got there. I don't know how the car came. I don't know anything because it was a blackout. Got home and begged him to take me back to the hospital, and he did. 2 more weeks of the shock treatments. I came home, and in the 4th of November, 1960, I was still drinking, and it did absolutely nothing for me. You told me that if I drank long enough, it would be like drinking water. That's exactly what happened. But I still had a little stash of sleeping pills. And I chose to take my life. And the night I chose to take my own life, grace of God that I've come to know through you folks sharing your God with me, saw fit that I should not die. And when I came to the next morning, I heard me cry out loud, my God, I can't even kill myself. Now what do you do? And that's when the first gift came to me. My God, Tommie, you're an alcoholic. That's what this has all been about. And then came the second great gift, the desire to be sober. I didn't know how not to drink. I couldn't drink, but I didn't know how not to. I was so emotionally paralyzed in that bed, I wasn't drunk. But I do remember a friend came over and said, Tommie, you're the only one who can get you out of that bed. And I do remember it was an awful struggle. I don't ever want to remember the struggles of active alcoholism. It's awful. And I can't imagine what it's like to be a family. If anybody could have saved any of us, our families would have, and they couldn't. So I asked my husband if he would please ask a gal I knew was in the fellowship, and she and her hubby came. They were both in the fellowship. And they took me up to High Watch. I have a little throat. And I shall be eternally grateful. The very first morning I was there, I ate breakfast. I hadn't eaten breakfast in years. And I slept. And I had to ask Wes, who was then the director at High Watch, what happened, Wes? I haven't slept without the aid of a pill or a drink in years. And I haven't eaten breakfast in I don't know how long. And he said, you made a decision. If any of you are sitting here tonight on the fence, not knowing, please, while you're here, try to make the decision for your sake. This is a progressive illness. It always gets worse. It never gets better. And no decision not to drink is a decision to drink. I haven't found it necessary to take a drink since I made a commitment to not drink. And alcohol, by the way. I was so surprised to find out that there are a lot of other drinks. Wow. That's amazing to me. I remember how surprised I was. I just wish for you the journey that I have had, I am having, that I am on. That was in November, and I came home from High Watch. I had to stay there for a week. And about the fourth day that I was there, we had this little chapel service. Wes would just sit there and chat with us for a few minutes. And he ended with 4 words, let go and let God. And I believe that morning that I did. And it was the first time I had a weight on my shoulder that I truly believe was the physical presence of the God-only understanding. It's only happened one other time since. And I remember going to a minister friend, clergyman friend of mine, and asking him about it, and he said, Tommie, most people never have them at all. So consider yourself blessed. And I do, for so many reasons. And at the end of the week, I told Wes, it's okay, I can go home now. He said, now go home, find yourself a group. That was easy. We had one group in our town at the time. Find a sponsor. That was easy. There was one other female in our group. And I believe so strongly in the philosophy of AA that men 12-step men. And women 12-step women, and sponsor women, and men sponsor men. We could get too easily emotionally involved, and we do. And that was easy. There was one other gal in the group. And I started getting so active in AA because I wasn't drinking. And I thought, this is a piece of cake. I had no clue that I had 2 other parts of my illness, emotional immaturity and spiritual bankruptcy. I did not know that. And somebody has talked about that this weekend. I'm not even going to try and mention names because it's Saturday night. But there have been beautiful, beautiful messages. So something happened in that February. I don't know what happened. But I had not done anything about getting AA active inside of me, where my alcoholism is. I was so busy getting people sober. I never knew that I had to work on myself. And so I picked up that drink on 5 days. It was probably the 9th of February maybe, and then that Valentine's Day. And 5 days later, on the 19th of February, we went to a High Watch dinner dance meeting in New York. And somebody said something that I came to believe. You talk about the surrender. Tommie, if you ever take another drink again, you have nobody or nothing to blame but yourself. That was the night that I made the commitment. I will not drink, no matter what. Even if all my 5 children, 5 grandchildren, 8 great-grandchildren are killed at one time, I will not drink or take a pill for me. And I meant that, and I asked God to help me with it. My first year in AA was trying to quiet the rage inside, quiet the war, quiet the incredible unease, dis-ease. I could not let me feel anything. I had to let me feel anything my whole life, but the alcohol let me feel it. And I wasn't drinking, so now what do? Those slogans saved my life that first year, and I will never forget. I had a sponsor who was so incredible. But that February 14th, after I had that drink, nothing happened. Nothing happened except the guilt, the remorse. And so help me, I never want to feel that guilt, remorse again, and I never have to. We never have to feel again the way we felt that got us here. Pain is a great motivator. And I went up to my then sponsor's house, and I said to her, this was on a Tuesday, and I said, what am I going to do to have the right change for the paperboy for Saturday? And I have to have the right change for the children for Sunday school on Sunday. And how do you cook turkey next Thanksgiving? And how do you do Christmas shopping without a drink? How in the world am I going to celebrate my first anniversary next February 14th without a drink. I can still hear her pounding her fist on the kitchen table, and she said, "For God's sakes, Tommie, it's only Tuesday. Would you please use it up first?" Now, I don't know about you, I was good at living it a day at a time, but it was never the right day. She was so right. I had absolutely no way of disciplining myself. I could not get my head in the right area. I couldn't make decisions. We lived in this lovely home, and I don't know how many windows, but each window has about 12 panes in these little squares, and they got so dirty, you know. And I called her up and I said, "Sally, I've got to wash these windows." She said, "But I can't." She said, "Wash one pane." One pane, then what do? Call me. I'd wash one window and I'd call her. I said, "I did it." Wash another pane, dear. And that is exactly how I got to doing things in AA. You folks became my emotional discipliner. You made decisions for me. And I cannot thank that lady enough. She was incredible my first year in AA. At the end of my first year, I met who was to become my then sponsor, and I know one of you in particular knew her very well, and that was Hazel Rice, who was at our General Service office. And we had her at our convention in Connecticut. And on Sunday morning at the spiritual panel, she said, "Let us keep not only an open mind, but also an open heart." And I had my first AA cry. I wasn't crying, but the tears were streaming down my face. I had been so closed off for so long. And just that magic, not magic, miracle. I think magic we can describe, miracle I can't. And I went up to Hazel afterward and I tried to thank her. And I couldn't, I was crying so hard. And she grabbed my hand, and all the time that she was greeting people, she wouldn't let it go. And afterward, we talked a while, and she was on a service panel that afternoon. And she was talking about GSR and DCM and all this stuff. I thought she was talking about vegetable soup. And by the way, Bill also asked us to please don't use the letters, because new people don't know what you're talking about. When you're talking about what we now say GSR, General Service Representative, District Committee Member, and Public Information Committee for Professional Community, so that we all know. We have a tremendous responsibility to let, instead of complaining about somebody doesn't know something, what's my responsibility to tell them? And so I started my journey away from the need for a drink with Hazel, and I shall be eternally grateful. She introduced me to the steps, and I truly believe that the steps help us to grow emotionally and spiritually away from the need for a drink. If I do not implement those steps inside of me to help me grow up emotionally, to help me grow spiritually, I will not grow away from the need for a drink. We used to sit and discuss the steps. We did a lot of service work together. I was sponsoring some women, and by the way, there are a couple of them here tonight. In fact, the gal who picked up the book tonight, I drew her ticket. I didn't know it, but she got the books. I mean, this is incredible. And she lives in Michigan. She comes, you know how this all happened. I'll try to describe it. Forgot where I was. In 1965, we had our international in Toronto. You've been talking so much this weekend about I am responsible and closing some of the meetings with it. I cannot tell you how, I may cry again, incredible meaning that has to me. I had the privilege of being delegate from Connecticut in 1965 and 66, and when we were delegates at the International, we had the privilege, before all the GSOs were developed throughout the world. Do you know that GSO in New York, happens to be in New York, was the only GSO in the whole world until 1966, and Mexico was the next GSO, and then London. Now there are 57 GSOs throughout the whole world, General Service Office. This is incredible to me, but in 1965, our office was the only one in the whole world, and 5 ladies serviced the whole world. The delegates had the privilege of being part of a ceremony up in Toronto, and we dedicated that I Am Responsible declaration. There were maybe 40 of us. Not all the delegates got to the International, but those of us who did, we sat all behind the stage while the big wigs were out in front, you know. And Bill got talking that night, and he talked for about 2 hours, and we thought, won't he ever shut up? It was hot back there. It was 4th of July weekend. And then we thought, you know, you guys better shut up, because a lot of people never heard Bill. So we dutifully tried to be quiet. But at the end of his talk and all the introductions and so forth, those of us who were sitting behind stage broke through this huge big, did I do that pop before? No? Anyhow, we burst through this huge big world of parchment paper on stage, and we walked through and spread across the stage, and in our own languages we repeated the I Am Responsible declaration. So that has become an incredibly important part to me. I had the privilege of receiving Al Steckman's library. Now, Al was the 3rd editor of the Grapevine, one of the first 100 AA members, and he wrote the I Am Responsible declaration. And several years later, in fact it happened to be 67, he wrote an article. Al was living in West Palm Beach at the time. He wrote an article for the Today, which is the newsletter of the West Palm Beach Intergroup. And in it, he wrote why he wrote that I Am Responsible declaration. You know, if AA fails, it will fail from within. Bill has told us that. And if it fails, one of the reasons it can fail is through financially, because we are self-supporting. I don't know about you, but when I got through drinking, I was buying a half-gallon bottle of gin, and it was $5. I was spending about $35 a week on alcohol. If I go to 7 meetings a week and put in $5, I go to about 4 or 5 meetings a week and put in $5. I'm still not hitting what I spent for booze. I don't know about you, but I never questioned the price of alcohol. And I better think about what I'm putting in that basket, so that we will always not only be for everybody anywhere, we want the hand of AA there, but also financially for it to be there so that we can be available to other people. I want them there for my children, for my grandchildren. My son, my youngest, is 53 and he has 32 years. One of my daughters died a couple years ago. She had 12 years. And I need to talk about that a little bit, because you have given me such a gift. Back in '89, Barb was to have a biopsy out in California, and I was in Florida, and I got on an airplane to go out there as mothers do, and got on that airplane, and I was absolutely petrified. I had a little book that was given to me. In fact, I think Maureen gave it to me. And I put it in my desk drawer because I figured somebody made money on AA. And I'm such a prude when it comes to traditions, so I'm going to read it. And I heard this contempt prior to investigation, Tommy, and you better read that book. So I grabbed it because it was small enough, it fit in my pocketbook. And I got on the airplane, and I'm reading the book, absolutely petrified. And I'm reading it, and it came to the part where it says, get God-centered. And I had been so self-centered. And I could get God-centered for about that long, and I was boom, right back to self-centered. God-centered, self-centered. It never occurred to me what Barbara was feeling. I was so involved with myself. I thought, I wonder what she's feeling. Turned out to be cancer. She had 10 good years. And she died a couple years ago. Her dad died the year before that. And she said, thank God Dad died first. He couldn't have taken it, but you can do it. You got a program on, you can do it. Let me tell you that life and you have given me such a program to deal with life on life's terms. That came to me, and it was all about her at the end of her life. All about her. I've had such powers of example in this fellowship. A big one came in 1966. Abby Thatcher died. Now, Abby was Bill Wilson's sponsor, and he wanted you to know that. Bill wanted you to know that he was his sponsor, and that Abby died with 2.5 years of sobriety. Well, Abby's funeral was up in Albany, and there were 12 of us who went to that funeral. 12 of us. 12 steps, 12 traditions, 12 concepts. We knew something very special was going on. There was Bill and Lois and Maggie and Mickey McPike, who was had a rest farm up in Rochester where Abby was at the time. Abby's sister and niece and nephew, and my sponsor Hazel and myself. We're driving up from Connecticut. When you're in this car with your sponsor, things happen. And my fifth step poured out of me. Absolutely poured out of me. I had taken the immoral inventory many times. I give you a little bit, and you a little bit, and you a little bit. But that day, the moral inventory poured out. My need for approval. What was my part in all of the transactions or interactions with people? What was my part? And never mind the blaming them. What was my part? And all of that came out of me. It just poured out of me. And I remember standing with Bill at Abby's casket with our arms around each other, and I said, you know, Bill, who was to say, because Bill never stopped 12-stepping Abby. He said, who was to say, I said to Bill, who was to say if Abby had been given the grace to stay sober that you would have? And he said, Tommie, I've thought of that so often. When I was new in fellowship, I think I'm jumping around a lot, I don't know. I jumped around while I was drinking. Some of the ladies who had given me the privilege of sponsoring them weren't staying sober. And so I went to Bill, I'd already met him, and complained. I did more than complaining about it. Didn't they know who they asked? You know, the great Messiahs arrived when I got here. So he said, because I used to tell him what to do. If you just do it my way. And it was only because I wanted to be right. That was one of my worst shortcomings, the need to be right. And he said to me, Tommie, do you think I 12-stepped Dr. Bob so he wouldn't drink? And I said, sure, Bill. Isn't that why we 12-step, so they don't drink? And he said, oh no, I 12-stepped Dr. Bob so I wouldn't drink. So in essence, he said it much nicer. But he said, when you think you're so smart, you know what somebody else needs to hear, that's only because your own head needs to hear it. So pay attention to what you tell somebody else. We don't get anybody else sober. We're not taking any credit for that. But I owe my life to the ladies who said I was their sponsor because I heard me. And that's what this is all about. Each of us sponsors somebody else, and Bill used to talk about that. You know, a lot of people give us a lot of credit, but no way are we doing anything for somebody else. If I happen to say something and they happen to be in need or at a willingness time, then two people meet through God's grace. So I owe my life to the people, and anything I do in this fellowship is to keep me sober. I am not in AA for any of the drinking I've done. I'm in AA because I don't want to drink anymore. So whether you pick up a big book tonight because you're the newest sober, we are all just as close to the next drink. You're talking about this theme this weekend as a vision for you. I have no idea when I started. I have no idea when I'm going to finish. Give me a license and boy, I run. But, you know, sobriety is just like drinking. Once you start, you don't know where you're going to end up or where you're going to stop. And it just keeps going. We've been talking, the theme has been the vision for you. And that's on page, I think, 152. I don't know where it is. It says it's on your program. But on the last page, it says, as we trudge the road to happy destiny. I looked up the word trudge, the word trudge in the dictionary, and it says to walk with a purpose. I used to think it was trudge. Walk with a purpose. And is that not what we do here? I've grown emotionally. I've grown spiritually. I've learned a lot. But the most important thing I've learned is how little I do know. There must be vast amount to learn. I've had some incredible teachers. Life happens. Life's not the problem. When I was newly in AA, I went to this group in Waterbury, mostly men. In those days, there were a few women. And I would go through this litany of what was the matter. And I'd get all through, and they'd say, what's the problem? Well, didn't you just hear me? And I'd go through the litany again. He, them. Do you have thems in your life? Terrible. And they'd say, what's the problem? About 3 times, I finally got it. The problem is not outside of me. Life is not the problem. The problem is how I deal with it. And I finally got the message. Life has been happening to me. Happens to all of us. Hazel died in my arms in 1971, and you know, sponsors shared with us how to live. This lady shared how to die. What a gift. What a gift. My husband chose to live his life with another family. That didn't get me drunk. 4 of my daughters have been married, a couple of them twice. That didn't get me drunk. 2 of them have lost 3 children. 2 of them, their husbands were killed very tragically, one by a drunken driver. The other one 6 weeks after she was married. It didn't get me drunk. Life doesn't get us drunk, folks. Just recently, show you my self-centered just sneaks back. In April, one of my son-in-laws died. And that's what I was saying for several months. My son-in-law. All of a sudden it dawned on me it was my daughter's husband. There's a big difference. But you talk about the gifts that we are given because we're sober. Terry knew he was dying and he was told that he would be going to hospice, and he said, please call my mom and ask her if she'll come up from Florida and take me. And we were on the way to Connecticut from Florida when Terry died. The fact that he wanted me to be there, I cannot tell you the gifts that you have given me. You told me that I had an attitude problem when I came here, and I didn't know what you meant. Until one of you smart people said, today I'm not behind in my ironing, I'm just ahead in my washing. Those of you who didn't laugh don't know what ironing is. I remember the last year that I was married. I finally learned. Somebody said to me, do what's right for you, Tommie. I had never done what was right for me directly. Oh, I did it this way. Manipulations to fit me. somebody said, do what's right for you, Tommie. And I found that when I do what's right for me, it turns out to be right for everybody else. It's been an incredible journey. I came finally to realize, back to the original need for approval, that I was trying to be the best wife I thought my husband wanted me to be, the best mother and so forth. It's not that way anymore. Our last year of marriage, I was the best wife I was capable of being. I am the best mother I'm capable of being. And I take my inventory this way today. Both my parents have died. You know, we have survival skills. I'm the last one in my generation. Everybody else is dead. There's something to say about AA. We have survival skills. It's amazing. I like to look at my inventory and look at the categories into which I fall. I am a mother. I have these 4 wonderful children, adults. My oldest daughter, who took the brunt of my drinking a year ago, called and asked me if she could please come live with me. She said, you know, when I went to live near Dad, it was because I didn't know him. She said, I know you and I want to come live with you. This is the gal who took the brunt of my drinking. You talk about the gifts in AA, our unworthiness, and you wonder, am I grateful? I am awed by all of this. Because remember, I didn't want to be here to begin with. I committed suicide. I know it's not I here. So I have these 4 children, so I'm a mother. Through God's grace, working through you people, I have many friends, so I am a friend. I'm an AA member. What kind of a grandmother am I? I've been at the birth of my daughter's children. Incredible gifts. So I take my inventory this way. Am I the kind of mother I would like to have? Am I the kind of mother, a sister, no longer a sister? Am I the kind of friend I would like to have? What kind of an AA member am I? When the answer is no, I have to look inside of me. That's where I need to change in my attitude. I want to tell you just 2 great 12-step experiences that I've had that epitomizes me, the beauty of AA, the miracle of AA. Many years ago, we had a young lady going from New Haven, Connecticut to Chicago on a bus, and she was absolutely petrified. We got a bus schedule, and we got a road directory. In those days, we had one directory. And at every bus stop, there was an AA member there with a cup of coffee. The last time I saw Bill, we all saw him for a few minutes, a few seconds in Miami. But our last personal time with Bill, Lois had invited us to lunch. And if any of you have been to Stepping Stones, I imagine some of you have. If you haven't, try to get there. It's awesome, whether it's Dr. Bob's in Akron or about Dr. Bob's birthplace in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, or Bill's Wilson House in Vermont. Stepping Stones at Bedford Hills. And in the living room, as you come in the front door, there's a fireplace on your left. And Bill had a roaring fire in the fireplace that day. Lois was a little upset with him because it was a big fire, but it worked. And he came running up the steps on this snowy day, no coat. And I said, Bill, what are you doing running up the steps? He said, I quit smoking. Should have started 9 years ago, but at least I'm not smoking. And we got in and we were having lunch, and the fireplace, then a coffee table, and then a couch facing into the fireplace, and their dining table area in the left corner of the room. And Lois is at one end of the table, and then my sponsor Hazel and myself, and Bill was sitting at this end, like that end, Lois here. And a lady who shall remain nameless was on the other side, suffering a very deep depression. And she was really suffering, and she excused herself from the table, and she got up and she went over and laid down on the couch so that we couldn't see her. because the back of the couch was toward us. Now, Bill loved crowds. He loved crowds, but he loved better talking with a sick alcoholic, always one-on-one. And I don't think Bill sat at that table more than a minute. When he excused himself, and he went over and he sat down at that coffee table so that he was facing us, looking down at her, 12-stepping her. And I wonder how I got from there to here. To me, that's epitomized our 12-step work, watching Bill Wilson 12-step a sick alcoholic. And why it should be I, when I committed suicide the night before I came to you, I do not know. I don't have to know. Somebody asked Bill once how it worked. He said, just fine. And he really said. I would like to close with a little prayer that I pray often, but may I first thank the committee, all of you who did anything to get me here, and it's each of you. We're all a chain in this link of sobriety. What kind of a link am I have to ask. So I thank each of you. I believe the key to my sobriety is the two words, I believe, and people. And to me, people are like the seeds of a flower. They need the miracle of God and man to make them grow. And to me, that is AA, the miracle of God and man. Dear Lord, please help me to accept the kind of life you have chosen for me to live. Make me ever mindful of the needs of others and what you would have me do with my life, that thy will be done. Thank you very much, and I love you.